The Brandon Peters Show may contain explicit language and detailed plot points. For more information on the show, stay tuned to the end of the episode. And now, here's Brandon.
Welcome to the first episode of The Brandon Peters Show. I'm Brandon. On this show, Scott Mendelson from Forbes joins me for a discussion of the 2003 film Shanghai Knights. But before that, whoever you are, wherever you're coming from, thank you for checking this show out. As with any podcast, I hope you stick around to feel it out a little bit and enjoy the evolution of the program. I recommend you check out my introduction episode I posted to get a bit of background on the plans for the show and ideally how it will roll out. The Brandon Peters Show will be providing a variety of content, and this is just one avenue of such content. Again, thanks for streaming in, and I look forward to sharing this adventure with you. My first guest on the show is a writer for Forbes and the premier box office analyst on the globe. But when I met him, he was a writer for Valley Scene magazine. Thank you for joining me on this inaugural effort, Mr. Scott Mendelson.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be your very first guest.
Yes. It all starts with Scott, really. I mean, we met long ago, but in this avenue definitely stems back from the old Mendelson's Memos days.
Back when I was cool.
You were the staunch defender of blockbuster cinema, or is that what someone called you?
Yes, that was a champion of the mainstream, I think.
Champion of the mainstream, yeah. You're like, no, that gets clicks.
I didn't like Drive as much as some people did.
Oh, right.
Of course, nowadays, my hating Midnight in Paris makes me cool on film Twitter, but whatever.
Oh, wow. We're going to talk about Owen Wilson today again, too.
We're talking about
as he discovers historical figures. Wow.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Cool. I bet you long ago we were both working at a place, I believe it was 2005. It was when I first moved to Los Angeles. You were my first new friend I met out there. We worked at a DVD quality control place, pre-Blu-ray at the time, called International Quality Control, called IQC. And I remember I met you because you sounded like someone like me talking about movies, and you were open to talk about movies, and it felt like people didn't always talk about movies like that. But I instantly was drawn to you, and we just we hit it off pretty easily right away.
More or less. You were probably my first regular social call. I had been living there about 6 months beforehand. I had moved out in November of 2004. And I don't know if it was the first social call we did, but one of the first is it seemed like a good idea at the time. We went to the Man's Chinese Theater and watched the entire first season of 24.
Oh, yes!
In a day. It was a full day event to plug the show's debut in syndication.
Yes.
So this was right around the 5th season, give or take.
But we were drawn there because we were offered, they said that Kiefer Sutherland, Carlos Bernard, the cast of the show would be stopping by in the middle of the night to see everybody.
They did not.
They did. And then it was John Cassar, the producer of the show or director of a lot of episodes. He was going to stop by and do a Q&A. And then, state of the end, we're giving away a big screen. That was...
By the end of that, we were all a little loopy.
Oh, yeah.
I will never, ever do that again, but it was worth doing once.
The best part was that big screen TV. I think we got to a point where we were just like, well, we might as well stay and see if we won the TV. And the first person who drew, you had to be in attendance to win, had left. Oh. And everybody booed. I remember that. But oh my, nothing like seeing the area in Hollywood with the Man's Chinese the morning after 24 of just dead.
Yeah, because this was like a
never again.
Was it Friday or Saturday?
I think it was like a Saturday into a Sunday. It started like Saturday morning. And it was
work day. Wow. So
never again.
I distinctly remember by the end of this, and this is one of those you had to be there moments, but when they would do, if you've seen an episode of 24, they'll do, they do previously on 24, and it was, the president is in danger, my family's involved, and someone I work for is, responsible or something. And we would all be going at the end, the president is in danger. Ah!
Yes.
My family is involved. Ooh! And someone I work for may be involved. Yee! And that's basically what kept us awake for the last several episodes.
I think in the middle of the night, too, or somewhere in the early AM, they started running around with the camera, getting like little spots for the program. And everybody's like, I think it was like 24 weekends was the catchphrase. And you were like, everybody's like, 24 weekends.
Like, come on, this is the Terry has amnesia part. We're all taking a nap now.
Oh, man. Oh, gosh. That was, yeah. We have stamina. Not good stamina, but stamina. Oh, my gosh. Oh, yeah. And I think we also, one of our first outings was the James Gunn film Slither with no effects.
Yes, we saw a very early cut of Slither. Yeah, you're right, with very rough effects. It was fine. We also saw an early cut with somewhat finished effects of James Wan's Dead Silence.
Oh, yeah.
This was back before we were in a position where we couldn't go to test screenings.
Oh, no, this is one of our best stories.
Oh, God.
Because remember, we were in line. All they said was the new film from the director of Saw. And they came in line and they were asking people questions. They were trying to grill people to weed out the people. Because if you were an industry person, you could not be at test screenings. And working at IQC, we were considered industry people.
Yes.
And you were a critic at Valley Scene, so you were definitely not allowed there, too, on that. And
no intent of reviewing the film in its present form. But
right.
Yes.
And they came to us and they said they were asking questions of people like what brought you to the film. And I didn't want to sound, you were like, say something dumb.
Yeah.
But like I like horror movies, but I'm like, I want to sound dumb, but I want to sound kind of smart at the same time. So they asked me. And they're like, well, I go, well, I'd like to know what Lee Wanell is doing outside of the Saw world. And she go, oh, Lee Wanell, because James Wan, Lee Wanell, I mixed up the names. He wrote the film we were going to see, but they were not promoting it that way. And she goes, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. You a fan? I'm like, yeah, I like it. I like his stuff. So I checked this out. And she goes, oh, okay. And we sat down, and then you went to go get popcorn. And the lady came back to me. She goes, "Hi, Brandon." I'm like, "Hey," and she's like, "Oh, so what kind of stuff do you do? Where do you work at?" And I was like, "I work at Best Buy." And she's like, What are you into? Like, what? And she was grilling me. Like she had her sights on me, and then she left, and you were still gone. And she came back, and she goes, "Hey, Brandon." I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Hi, this is Lee Wanell," and it was him. And he was like, "Hello." Oh, he's like, "How are you doing?" She goes, "He's a big fan of yours. He's excited for this movie. He knows you wrote it." And he's like, "Oh, really? Well, I hope you enjoy the show." I was like, "Oh man, I made a mistake because that's not James." I was like, I mixed their names up. And then you sat back down, and she was like, "Hey, we'd like to have you guys for a focus group after," which is keyword for we're gonna get your names and blacklist you.
Yeah.
And we left right after the film. Great up, but not without your amazing scorecard. Because it was Dead Silence was the movie where it's about a possessed ventriloquist dummy stuff type like that. Didn't have a title, but in the suggested title you put Ventriloquist.
See, I could have sworn that was you.
No, that was you. It was
okay.
Stroke of brilliance.
I'm happy to give you credit for that joke. But I will take that's fine.
That was all you.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I could have sworn it was you, but that's yes. Then because it was kind of if you've seen Dead Silence, it's as much of a adventure film, and it's more like The Ring than Saw. And yeah, they didn't have really a working title, so Ventriloquist. It was funny at the time.
Yeah, but you introduced me in the world of I was into reading reviews, critic things, but you were the first person I ever met. You wanted to be the critic. Like a lot of people out in LA, they were maybe writing reviews and stuff, but they really wanted to be a screenwriter or director, all this stuff. But I was like, wait, you want to be this? And then you introduced me to this whole new world, which, started informing my interest of it with your, box office analysis and then, wanting to be a film critic and taking me to these critic screenings, I've seen films because of you in some of the oddest places because that's where they were holding a critic screening. it was really interesting. So what brought you to just criticism overall instead of being on the, like, I want to be a screenwriter, creative side actor?
I'm a failed creative that's bitter and resentful that my dreams didn't come true. No, I went to school for film theory criticism. And yes, I moved out into LA with, theoretical ideas of doing something in the film industry. Cutting trailers always seemed to be something I was kind of good at. But before I was able to get an entry-level job at any of the trailer companies, I fell into the DVD thing, which frankly paid more money.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of became golden handcuffs. But during that time, I had answered an ad for, I think it was a bi-weekly rag called Valley Scene Magazine. And, they were able to get me into the press screenings. It was no pay. It was just something neat for me to do. And I did it. Skipping a little bit here, I met someone, we got engaged, we had a kid, we got married, which was all intended, just the opposite order. She just turned 13, actually, my first daughter today. And if you knew anything about how hard of a baby she was in the first 4 months, before our wedding, the joke was always, oh, did you get married because I was, because of me? Like, no, hon, we got married to spite you. She was a very challenging baby. But anyway, around 2008, I started being a little bit more aggressive in terms of pursuing the screenings on my own. I sort of would pay attention to who was in the subject line from the emails that Valley Scene was sending to me. So, who was in the studio or what have you. I started blogging for myself on what would become Mendelson's Memos. And that was just something to do because, being a parent of a colicky toddler didn't give me a ton of free time. And I was still working at the DVD place. And around 2008, I started trying to go after screenings myself. The first one was The Dark Knight. I literally, knowing I would fail, but I knew there was a screening in what's now the big Cinemark down by the LAX airport. So I drove down there with a copy of Valley Scene Magazine. I said, hey, can I come in? And they said, of course, no. And I said, that's fine. Can you give me some contact information that I can call you so I can get in the next couple screenings? And they did, and I did. And that was the first one I ever did for myself. And from then on in, along with the writing and the blogging and all that stuff, I was basically making my own way into these critics lists with mixed success, understandably, because, sometimes they care more about the outlet than who you are, and that's fine.
Right.
So I did, I wrote for myself for 5 years as a hobby until Forbes hired me as one of their contributors. And through luck and happenstance and, okay, fine, a little bit of talent, that became my job. And I've been doing that for about 7.5 years. Obviously, I had kept in touch with Brandon during this time, even when he moved back to Indiana. And I had actually switched jobs. I had gotten out of the DVD business, and I had become a paralegal. And I had gotten what, frankly, was a full-time job. And asked Brandon, hey, I want to keep the blog going, but I'm not going to have time to put in as much content as I'd like to. Do you think you can contribute every once in a while so I can keep the machine rolling? And you did. You did a massive and, frankly, very insightful blow-by-blow analysis of the James Bond series. And from what I gather, when I started doing Forbes, that's when you started your Naptown Nerd blog, and that started you on your path to fortune and glory.
Yeah, no, I believe you called me when you got the Forbes gig, and you were like, I don't know, like as if I was going to be like, no.
No, I felt I owed you a phone call more than just the mass blog.
I appreciate that. But you told me you would give me the keys to that site. I was like, nobody wants to log into Mendelson's Memos for Peter's points, but so it was what I needed. Like you got me to write. I mean, I think I'd written a couple reviews for you. Yeah. For movies you didn't see, like before you brought me on with the James Bond stuff. When I wrote my first 2 reviews for the James Bond, or the pieces for the James Bond, I registered the Naptown Nerd name. I'm like, okay, after the James Bond, I'll just launch off into my own. And then you're like, hey, you want to do, you know what? I'm just going to stay here for a while at the Mendelson's Memos. And I was comfy. I was like, you know what? I'm Brandon Pierce from Mendelson's Memos. That's fine. And then when you did that, you finally kicked me to actually start getting into my own blog. And within a month of that, I was at Why So Blue. Like I was co-writing Why So Blue and Naptown Nerd until I started Cult Cinema Cavalcade. And I was like, okay, that's one thing too many. And that and now it's resurrected just because I just need a personal place right now to share info about things. But yeah, that was interesting times. And since Forbes, you've taken off. Your name gets tossed around, and like I take it for granted. I'm not Scott, but You got to be on a Batman Blu-ray once.
Yes.
And
I was a talking head on the 25th anniversary documentary for Batman. I've done a few talking head things. Not any in a while, just because I haven't been the flavor of the month for a while. Life goes on. But yeah, that was neat. That was in 2014.
It's a bucket list thing I have for myself. Is like, I just give me a talking head on a DVD, then I'll quit everything. I'm done. No, but I mean, you've had interactions with, I mean, some people that you grew up reading and,
Yes.
and enjoying on a more face-to-face basis with. I think there's a little network of us from your tree of things are interconnected, like with, the Aaron Newirth Out Now and just a bunch of different people to talk. The Out Now universe or something, I don't know.
Yes.
But and it's weird how critics do have that, because if you'll look around at other sites and stuff, you'll have little cliques of people that know each other, kind of how that works in the world. And you have interactions with filmmakers and stuff that like you and don't like you at the same time, but no sweat off your back.
I try not to take it personally, and I would assume they don't either.
Yeah.
My thing is that in their shoes, they shouldn't be thinking about me at all.
Right. And most of the time, I mean, the one thing I have loved about your writing and discussing film with you as collaborators, friends, whatever, is that you have a good conviction and you're also honest. And in a way that's not harsh, that's not crude. It's just you lay out facts about certain things, especially with box office analysis. You're not picking on anyone. There are stats that you bring out that are almost like, that are really cool, I like. And it's almost like those weird stats sometimes in sports that they might pull up where they're like, oh, this is the fifth guy to have 30 points on April 3rd with two rebounds or something like that. And it makes sense, and it's educational as well.
I appreciate that. I do try to put the work in.
Yeah, I know what I know about the box office because of you and being your friend, and then also reading. And I've had the Tomb Raider trap in my lingo since I met you way before. You were saying Tomb Raider trap back in 2005. So, and now it's commonplace. You go on like Twitter and stuff like that, and you will find someone using that on a regular basis.
It's basically when a anticipated and well-hyped movie does very well despite it not being particularly good. It often does not leg out. It's a very front-loaded run. And then a couple of years later, you get a sequel that's actually a noticeably better movie, but it underperforms or flops because once bitten, twice shy. Named for Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, which I have long argued is a much better film than the first Tomb Raider. Other examples offhand, Angry Birds 2.
Out of the Shadows?
Yes, TMNT, Out of the Shadows, which is easily, by far, the second best Ninja Turtles movie ever made.
Oh, for
other
sure.
than the one from 1990. So, stuff like that, where you have the brand and the IP or some other factor, makes it a bigger hit, not necessarily in relation to its quality. People showed up to Da Vinci Code because they read the book or they had heard about it. But then 2-3 years later, the much, much more fun Angels and Demons, which didn't flop, by the way, but it made a lot less than Da Vinci Code. And the other thing is just, the quick kill blockbuster, which I've been talking about that since Batman Returns, because that was where a movie that is very anticipated and very hyped, it's a preordained hit. It opens huge and it drops like a rock, but it opens so huge and, it still makes money for the first few weeks, that it's still a huge hit, even if no one really liked it that much. Not to pick on Batman v Superman, but Batman v Superman's a pretty obvious example. The movie made $873 million worldwide from a $424 million global opening. Another example, and I think this is important, is Warcraft. People like to throw around Warcraft as, the Chinese people have no taste. They loved Warcraft. Warcraft was more front-loaded in China than it was in North America. The movie made $220 million in China from $90 million in the first 48 hours. So they all wanted to see it. They all came to see it. They all came out holding their nose and telling their friends not to see it. Godzilla is another example.
Do you think with our regularly quick kill blockbusters being a regular thing now, that's the reason for our severely shortening windows from theater to home video? But I think like something can still be made. Like it's 17 days for Universal now? Is that what
Yeah. And if
you tell me you don't want that third week Fast and Furious money?
It's a choice. They can it's a case by case basis.
Yeah.
And if I'm being optimistic, which I know is dangerous, but if I'm being optimistic, I have to assume that this is for movies like Gem and the Holograms, which, opens to $1.5 million, closes out at like 4, and, is out of theaters in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And for a movie like that, yeah, there's no real reason for you to wait 90 days to put that on DVD. I get it.
Yeah.
I might not like it, but I get it. Or The Snowman, which made like $7 million. If you have something like Get Out that drops like 30% in its first weekend and, ends up doing like 7 times its opening weekend, no, you're not going to pull that from theaters and or put it on PVOD in the third weekend. You're going to let it play out.
Right.
It's an estimated bet. And, even a lot of films that we consider to be very leggy, they do most of their money in the first 5 weeks, give or take. Spider-Man, Frozen, yada, yada. Well, Frozen, I think, was a little leggier, just because there was nothing else to see that for families that season. I think also they want to be in a situation where they can put, ideally, a greater variety of content into nationwide theatrical release, knowing that, hey, the people that really want to see this in theaters will see it in theaters. And then after 17 days, it'll just be on VOD.
It might front load them even more if people know it's coming to VOD sooner and they want to see it in the theater, and they don't want it spoiled because once it's on VOD, open chatter is going to be much bigger.
Well, open chatter is, there was a certain film that I have not read it, but the plot synopsis is already on Wikipedia. You can put 2 and 2 together, but I don't want to, But yeah, the double-edged sword of that is that if people want to see a movie and they miss it in the first weekend, then they might say, I'll just wait 2 weeks and, watch it for $20 at home.
Right. It's optimistic to say that the people that weren't going to the theater anyway aren't going to go to it any more than the drop-off of people who might now wait instead might be less.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unknown variables. First of all, if it's only Universal doing that, then what does that mean for Disney, Warner Brothers, whatever? And if it's only AMC that's taking advantage of this, or what does that mean to Regal and Cinemark and ArcLight and the Laramie and all those chains, let alone the mom and poppers? You can speculate to your heart's content, but until this is put into practice, and frankly, it probably won't be for a while, just because Universal's next 2 big movies, No Time to Die and Candyman, are both MGM movies anyway.
Right.
So they will, in all likelihood, they will not be party to this program. I don't know off the top of my head what Universal's first 2021 release is. And, I don't think they're going to do this with Minions and Furious 9.
Yeah, probably the summer movies will hit the normal, unless they tank really bad. But
yeah, and I think Universal, to its credit, saw the storm coming and pulled all their stuff way in advance and put it way into the future. So theoretically, when things are quote unquote normal, they're going to just kick ass in summer 2021. They've got, Minions, they've got, F9. If it finishes in time, Jurassic World 3. And if they have to move No Time to Die again, then they'll have that in 2021. But they've got a stacked deck for at least next year. But yeah, I could spend the whole podcast talking about the health of each studio is right now. Let me just say this. I don't think it's a coincidence that right now the big Disney movies that are coming back to theaters are the Fox films.
Right.
It's not just contractual, although it is contractual.
Yeah, that's the people are like, New Mutants, just put that digital. I'm like, no, the agreement was that thing has to hit the theater.
If they could, they would have done it by now.
Oh yeah, they would have put it on VHS on a shelf at a store no one buys things from. That's what
they would have put it on Betamax.
There you go, CED, New Mutants. It's retro,
Divx.
like our posters.
Remember Divx?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, watch it twice and it's done.
Your HD DVD.
When the crime of the century brings 2 nations to the brink of war, the world must turn to 2 living legends.
I read about these guys. They're supposed to yell at them, try to make faces at them, but they'll never move a muscle. Here, watch this. That is the biggest damn beaver I have ever seen.
Roy, stop it.
Hey, look, the queen. She's mooning us.
America's favorite heroes
Hello, ladies.
are together again.
My father's been killed. My sister followed the murderer to London.
Let me see if I can get the facts straight.
You have a sister?
Introduce me. If you break her heart, I'll break your legs.
That's fair.
I want these men found. I can already see the headlines. Royal family eliminated.
Here. Come on!
What in our history together makes you think I'm capable of something like that?
Shanghai Knights.
I look like a fool. You have to open your mind to other cultures.
This country blows.
Yeah.
The film today we're going to be discussing is Shanghai Knights, the 2003 sequel to Shanghai Noon. And if you're wondering, like, why is the first episode Shanghai Knights? What in the world? Like, why are you launching this show? I'm sure it's questions or causing maybe a whimper in terms of audience excitement, but bear with me. There's a lot of meaning to this. We're doing this as a kind of like an inside joke, maybe, or just inside knowledge. Years ago, I can't remember how many, but I think there was the anniversary of the HHWLOD network, which is run by Mr. Jim Dietz, who's a friend of ours. We've done many podcasts with him. He does the Nothing's On podcast, many other shows. They were celebrating like a milestone of how many years they'd been putting out podcasts. And everybody who was involved with them was supposed to make like a 20 favorite films of all time or 20 best films of all time list. And we were on the Out Now with Aaron and Abe side of it. And it was you, myself, Aaron, Abe, and I believe Maxwell Haddad going over our lists. And you had a bombshell at number 2.
And Shanghai Knights. And needless to say, I'm going to have to single out Shanghai Knights.
Yes, yeah.
No. Shanghai Knights is one of those movies that I think I like more than anyone else on the planet.
We were quite surprised. It was a shocker. Nobody was expecting. It was probably the highlight of that show was that reveal. But I think you talked about Batman more than that because that was your number 1, of course. So here we are. That movie was the follow-up to Shanghai Noon. This podcast is a follow-up for me to Cult Cinema Cavalcade. And then this movie discussion will be a follow-up to that moment on Out Now with Aaron and Abe. So we're just following up the following up. So that is why this is the movie we're starting this show with. It was directed by David Dodkin, mainly a music video director. He'd done some for Coolio and Tupac and currently doing Maroon 5, but he was coming off a film called Clay Pigeons. And then he followed this film up with Wedding Crashers, Fred Claus, The Change Up, that Robert Downey Jr. movie, The Judge episode of Glowhand on Netflix for Marvel. And his most recent film was
Eurovision, the Netflix Will Ferrell picture. Will Ferrell, Rachel McAdams that was hot for a millisecond in June, like all Netflix originals.
That's like all anything Netflix is.
They've mastered the quick kill blockbuster.
Shanghai Knights stars Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson returning as Chon Wang and Roy O'Bannon. Aaron Taylor Johnson as a little tyke is in this. Tom Fisher, Aidan Gillen, Fan Wong, Donnie Yen, and Oliver Cotton. They're joining the cast. Jackie Chan, Owen Wilson, the only returning members from Shanghai Noon. Were you a fan of Shanghai Noon first?
Yes.
I thought it
was a solid picture. I enjoyed it more than the Rush Hour films. Rush Hour films are fine. I just felt, as a Jackie Chan fan, relatively speaking, I enjoyed the Shanghai Noon because he felt more comfortable there. It was more traditional Jackie Chan like action.
I think with this series, Rush Hour, that kind of cemented him as at least a staple in American cinema for at least 10 years. Probably. Yes. He had a good run. He had been up and coming. It was building since the late 80s. But if you've seen Rush Hour, that's just another studio doing something Jackie Chan's done before. Here in this series, he's licking his chops. Like he's like doing his stuff with new props, new environments, new costumes, new sets. And you can tell he's exploring his creative endeavors. That one does a lot of Old West stuff. It's a good movie. It's basically, it is what it is. It was Rush Hour in the Old West. Pretty much that's the selling point. I'm sure the pitch was, but it's very successful in its own right. And then it didn't do that well, I was looking at the box office. Did it do well for its time? Was marketing not as big a push then, or?
Well, it did fine.
Fine.
It
Like
on
that's
Memorial Day weekend. I guess Mission Impossible 2, which that film snagged one of the biggest at the time 3-day openings of all time.
Yeah.
It did, I think, $57 million over Friday, Sunday, over a $90 million Wednesday to Sunday opening. Shanghai Noon, actually, Disney sneaked that the weekend before. So for those that didn't want to see Dinosaur, we went and saw Shanghai Noon instead. Good choice. I know it opened to around 19 million over the full weekend. I think it did like 60 domestic and 99 million bucks and about a $60 million budget, which isn't great. I'm kind of surprised there was a sequel. I assume it did well on video.
Right. That's what I was looking at. And the sequel just a little bit under. Like they're about even Steven. I think the sequel did better in America the second time. Like I think it outgrossed the original in America, but less overseas.
Oh yes,
it was a cheaper film too.
February 2003, just before Valentine's Day weekend. So it opened right before Daredevil, and it earned $88.3 million on a $50 million budget. So again, they both did fine. I mean, the Rush Hour films were ridiculously successful. Even the third one just didn't cost too much. It cost like $140 to make, but it still did like $250 in the summer of 2007. And then of course the second Rush Hour, that almost broke the opening weekend record in 2001.
Right.
$66 million. And it legged out to like 226 in North America. That's still, I think, the biggest buddy action movie of all time. Unless there's some Pixar or Marvel movie that kind of sort of counts. I guess Inside Out, haha. But yeah, most Pixar movies are basically buddy films anyway.
And this is after, in between the first one and this one, Owen Wilson did I Spy with Eddie Murphy. So he was on the, grab a guy with, he was doing.
He was the Ryan Reynolds of his day.
Right, yes.
He's whoever stars with Denzel Washington on a given day of his time. Slightly more complicated joke. It didn't quite work. For the record, I don't know if it's my second favorite movie of all time.
It was that day.
I mean, it's. I haven't numbered them in a really long time.
Well, and it's a silly thing to number anymore. And I decried even back then. I'm like 20. You realize films have been around for over 100 years. I'm this many years old, and you think I can just whittle it down to 20? I know what my favorite movies are, but do I have to number them or put them in an order? I don't know. Some days.
The end of the year list, I usually chicken out and do alphabetical order.
Which is a smart thing to do.
As far as the movie, I saw it on opening night, not thinking anything other than this looks cute, and I liked the first one, and I loved it. In terms of the stuff that I go to the movies for, it was almost a perfect film. It starts in this very gravitas, pretentious way with the cape-wearing supervillain showing up, and it's Aidan Gillen wearing a cape. And
I thought he was Frank Langella Dracula.
Yes,
exactly. Perfectly. It was almost like with like a little anime spin on him.
It was the kind of sequel that remembered that it was a sequel. So the two mismatched characters who kind of didn't like each other in the first film, but then got to like each other by the end. At the beginning of this film, they like each other again. They have their differences. I'm not going to do a synopsis of the picture, but unlike, all due respect, Rush Hour 2, where they kind of go back to hating each other again.
Well, they do the thing where they have to meet again in this movie, which is a little... They quickly abandon the Old West in this movie. It's present for 3 minutes.
This one's in America.
Because we moved to New York for a good chunk of the first act.
Yes.
But I did notice you talking about them liking each other. I noticed what was really strong here in this movie was there was this, between the two leads and then the two villains, the counterparts, there was a theme of guilt in this movie for choosing your own path and not the one that someone else had laid out for you, whereas Chan Wang, his was his father's destiny for him, and with Owen Wilson, his was Roy, his character Roy, was with what Chan Wang maybe he thought had laid out for him and what he was doing, as versus the Rathbone and Wu Chao's thirst for the throne, which they think they have to be and they deserve that. They're looking for a wealth and power, where the other two are looking for a relaxed happiness. Yes. And it's kind of those trade-offs, and it's like this movie's a lot more brilliant than you might give it on the surface. But I was really into that theme that they had going on.
To quote that line that I like using from an otherwise unremarkable episode of Heroes at the end of the first season, the heroes, Wilson and Chan, they're looking for a happy life, while the villains are looking for an important life.
Mm-hmm.
And the action scenes are easily the closest thing we've gotten to his Hong Kong/Chinese pictures in terms of the quality of the choreography, the creativity of the choreography,
Right.
the length of the action scenes. The only thing I don't like about the action scene is that there's extended cuts on the DVD that are even better. And I understand pacing and flow or what have you, but I wish there was a way to watch the film with the extended version of the action scenes.
We could bring out the extended cut on, what studio was this? Was this
Disney.
Disney Plus could put this out. Take that Snyder cut. We have.
Well, if it was HBO Max, they might be able to do it. One thing I like about HBO Max is if there's an extended cut that ever existed, it will be available the extras of that movie. Furious 7 extended cut, we got it. Fantastic Four extended cut, you can pick whichever one you want. I like HBO Max. I think of
I think it's I was just bragging on it.
Yeah, it's the one that I most go to just for fun.
Yeah, it's got a great catalog of various years and various territories of film. It's wonderful, and you get all the HBO stuff on top of it. I mean, I wish it would be on the Roku box instead of having to use my crappy TV's app thing, but hey, it's pretty cool, and I have a lifetime membership to it as long as I have AT&T internet, so
yep.
I got that going for me. The movie it comes at a cost of Lucy Liu getting jettisoned from the cast.
Yes.
To make this work, as well as Brandon Merrill, who were the two female leads in the last movie, but her only movie is Shanghai Noon, and I guess she's a rodeo champion, so maybe that was just a one and done for her.
From what I gather, and I don't want to this is something I read like 20 years ago, but apparently there was slight friction with Lucy Liu and Jackie Chan just because she wanted to do more of her own stunts.
Okay.
And allegedly he had issue with that, and I wonder why, because I've certainly seen my share of Jackie Chan movies with female action heroes. I mean, obviously Michelle Yeoh in Super Cop, and frankly, the female lead in this film, who, spoilers I guess, kills one of the main villains.
Yeah, Chun Lin, she's for some reason instantly iconic looking, and in her movements and her performance and her costuming, just like, wow, okay, I'll take an action figure of that, please.
It's a very dynamic portrayal, and yeah, she's basically there as a love interest. Technically, she gets captured, but she's not a hostage. She's just there to, as a fall guy for the evil plot. And again, at the end of the day, she kills Donnie Yen at the end.
Yeah.
Donnie Yen, who, by the way, just kicks Jackie Chan's ass during their big fight scene.
Yeah.
That's another thing I find fascinating about this movie is that Jackie Chan fights both villains and does terribly in both fights.
Right.
He only wins the sword fight through a little bit of luck and a certain amount of self-sacrifice. He basically, does a suicide play, not unlike Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows, where he's clearly outmatched, but the villain's not willing to kill themselves.
Well, it's funny, like Lucy Liu during this time, the first one kickstarted her she would end up at Charlie's Angels and Kill Bill, Volume 1.
This was her sort of, me on, Ally McBeal, now enjoy me in this film type thing. And yeah, I assume they were being made around the same time anyway, but Charlie's Angels came out in November of that same year, 2000.
Yeah. So maybe that's why she was like, hey, I can do this. I was doing it for McG not too long ago. But yeah, her presence is missed a bit, but I get they want to get the boys going.
Yeah.
Get them doing their old thing again.
It's gleefully, historically inaccurate and doesn't care.
Yeah, it's having fun with names, with events.
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper shows up for a comedic
Jack
bit.
the Ripper shows up.
Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes, who gets to come what man film where a random supporting character gets the funniest line in the movie, for me anyway.
Yeah.
Where he basically remarks that, the gimmick is that the villain is 10th in line for the throne. And his plan is to...
Oh, yes. I had that. I wrote that down.
Yeah. He's going to King Ralph everybody. He's going to... Basically, it's very strangers on a train. He kills Jackie Chan's father and steals a jewel or something that allows Donnie Yen to take his place on the throne. And in exchange, Donnie Yen's going to machine gun all the royals during a big gathering. But miraculously, Rathbone's going to survive, so he will, by default, be the new king. And if you've seen Eurovision, which also contains a King Ralph moment in the first act, you must assume that David Dobkins likes King Ralph.
The line, I think Owen Wilson's, where he's getting put to death, or he's being tortured. He hears the plane. He's like, "You're like 20th in line for the throne." He's like, he rolls his eyes. He's like, 10th.
And then, of course, Artie, who's the inspector, runs into him at a gathering and says something to the effect of, "And I know you're only 10th in the line for the crown, but you'll always be number one in our hearts."
Oh, and Gillen's a treat in this movie. I mean, he had like Queer as Folk before this. This was a big American.
Yeah, this was the
shot
first time
for
I
him.
noticed.
And he was,
it's a very classical villain. And I don't know how much of the sword fighting is him, but who's ever doing it is a phenomenal sword fighter. And the film climaxes with a Jackie Chan, Aidan Gillen sword fight atop Big Ben, as all movies should.
right, inside atop Big Ben.
Yes, I'm sorry, inside Big Ben, that's movies in a nutshell.
Mhm.
And it's a terrific sword fight. Yes, I would put it up there with The Empire Strikes Back and The Princess Bride and Rob Roy.
Oh yeah,
in terms
it's good.
Of, one-on-one duels.
The funniest thing is the year before was Attack of the Clones, and it's almost similar to, with reverse roles, the Anakin Skywalker with two lightsabers against Count Dooku, but way more athletic and way more thrilling.
Yes. And again, Lucas is playing a different ball game with that particular film.
I wasn't meaning to dog on Attack of the Clones. I was with that calling out Star Wars prequels in my first episode.
Certainly the most low-key lightsaber fight in any of those films.
Mm-hmm. But it was more of a light and shadow fight.
Yeah, exactly.
And I understand that. That was just my description of the differences, not a slight.
I just want to protect you from hate mail.
Right. There we go. Yeah. Going after Star Wars, gotta get the listens.
Probably the most universally disliked one of all 9, give or take Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, God.
Well, that's another conversation.
I think like the fights and the choreography, like a lot of things, the musical cues are beautiful in this.
Yes,
they are silent film era evoking, and you get the blend. It's almost like a beginner's guide to showing like Jackie Chan. He incorporates kung fu into Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Safety Last type bits, and it really takes. Maybe it's the British settings and the classical look, but
yes. And it's a period piece, so you're willing to go along with a bit more flights of fantasy.
Mm-hmm. He's got the funny one with the revolving doors. He's got a singing in the rain moment. It's just wonderful.
For years, even before I had seen Rumble in the Bronx, the line was always that Jackie Chan was an action star, like a silent film star. He was very comedic, like Buster Keaton and yada, yada, yada. And this film basically was a subtext made text, where a number of the action scenes really feel like silent film bits. Successfully. They're also terrific action sequences. You're right. There's a singing in the rain bit with the umbrellas. There's a Keystone Cops bit. Mm-hmm. There's a big fight in the library with revolving doors and trying to protect artifacts from being smashed.
And trying to act like a wax figure to get type people. Like,
there's a certain matinee pulp attitude to the action scenes. It uses cliches that are so old-fashioned they're almost new. Because you just, outside of maybe the Indiana Jones films, that's the kind of game that movies don't play in as much anymore, even back then.
Yeah.
Let alone now.
This movie is really tied together by those sequences too.
Yes.
Like I think the story's pretty good. There's a lot of good drama, but there's some areas where it could tighten up and get to where it's going quicker, but I don't know what action piece I'd sacrifice.
No, it's certainly not a plot-driven movie. I think it works because of the action scenes and because all of the characters are fun. They're good company. You want to hang out with these people even when they're not kicking each other. And that, to me, is one of the keys of a good action picture, because you can't just have nonstop action. You have to have people that you want to hang out with even when stuff isn't going on. The dialogue is very clever. It's very quippy and punny and mean in a gentle way, if that makes sense. It's a very gee-whiz movie. After the prologue, there's almost no killing.
Right.
It follows the labyrinth rule, which you have an initial scene of comparatively brutal violence to establish the stakes, and you never have to go that extreme again.
Yeah, it's pretty dark opening with his father's death, but you clearly establish our big bad, the stakes. There's the familial relationship. It does in a way that Rush Hour 2 kind of fails in reminding you about the previous movie, but it's not as intense. It's like a calm version of like, these are what these guys are like, this is what their relationship's like, and here's a hijinks things that they get into. And it's kind of more natural, whereas some of them like to be bigger, louder, just to quickly remind you and get back into the saddle. No pun intended. Getting into the sequel to the buddy action thing. And I like that they're set up that nobody's where we thought they would be at the end. Well, yes. I mean, Jackie Chan is, but not where he wanted to be. He wanted to be with Roy. I mean, we see them last in Shanghai Noon, spotting a train as sheriffs, and that's not happening at the beginning of this movie. Things aren't all happy in Shanghai. And sadly, I mean, we set up for another adventure in
Hollywood.
Shanghai would be the next one, but it doesn't happen.
There was talk about it a couple of years ago, but honestly, I think the time has passed.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people that demands a 20 years later sequel to everything I vaguely liked back in the day.
Do the thing again. Do the thing. No, the same thing. I mean, if the money had been there, sure.
Right, yeah, if the movie had been more successful and they had knocked one out, 2005, 2006, 2007, that would be one thing. But this movie came out 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And since then, Jackie Chan is mostly, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, has stayed, making Chinese movies that have done very well in China.
Yeah.
He did sort of a loose Rush Hour knockoff of Johnny Knoxville, of all people, that in 2016 made like $250 million in China.
Right.
Skip Trace, it's called. I'm not going to say it's good because it's not, but it is what it is. He did do one movie that with Martin Campbell called The Foreigner.
Oh, Pierce Brosnan.
Yes, Pierce Brosnan. It's sort of a mix of a classical revenge thriller and a deep dive political drama. It's basically about Jackie Chan's character, who is a former soldier who also suffered from political violence at a very early age, whose daughter is killed by an IRA bomb. This is during a time when the IRA is sort of called a truce, so everyone's freaked out. And Pierce Brosnan is a government official trying to maintain the peace, while Jackie Chan basically goes rogue on a mission of vengeance. It's a very good film, and it's very much an against-type turn for Jackie Chan, and it works as both an action thriller and a political drama. Pushing the two together and watching them cause conflict for each other is very effective. But other than that, he's done. He was terrific in the Karate Kid remake from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think if that had come out in November of that year, he would have got an Oscar nomination out of it.
A couple times. One was last decade, meaning the '00s. He did a New Police Story called New Police Story, and then in the previous decade, being the 10s, he did another police. So he seems to go back to the police story, and they're kind of reinvent what he does a little bit, where he's at in life.
He sort of uses that franchise to sort of reset the wheel a little bit.
Mm-hmm. He's an Academy Award winner now, though, too.
Yes, he got an honorary Oscar a few years ago.
One of my favorite honorary Oscar wins of all time.
So the film, Shanghai Knights came out in February 2003. It opened in second place to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, understandably. It was a good concept with a peak rom-com Matthew McConaughey, a peak rom-com Kate Hudson.
My wife loves that movie.
Yeah, it gets the job done.
I've sat through it a couple times.
Neither of them are hard on the eyes, so it's pretty painless in that regard.
And then they got back together and searched for gold, and everybody rejoiced. It was called Fool's Gold, and
it was. It's one of those movies that I like probably more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Along with Disney's Meet the Robinsons, which is another one that I am obsessively fond of.
Well, when it came to picking one of those, I was like, I don't think you've written about this one as extensively as Meet the Robinsons. So
I do find reasons to bring up Meet the Robinsons more often, just because, you're talking about Disney tunes. That's something that comes up more often. But it's one of those movies that, I think I like more than basically anybody else. To me, it's not a perfect picture. In fact, I rewatched it for the first time in a while a few months ago. And it's a little overwritten in terms of some of the dialogue. Mm-hmm. I mean, through no fault of his own, Owen Wilson often talks when he doesn't need to.
Right.
And you're right. Plot-wise, it's a little raggedy. But there's just so much movie there.
Yeah.
You've got the sword fights. You've got the carriage chases. You've got the, the various, hand-to-hand combat. You've got the Jackie Chan versus Donnie Yen. Jackie Chan loses to Donnie Yen quite brutally.
Yeah.
Which is frankly kind of shocking for the egos on those two. When he fights Jet Li in the Forbidden Kingdom, neither of them are allowed to lose. It's very boring. I mean, without skipping too far ahead, one thing I liked about the big Vin Diesel rock fight scene in Fast 5 is there is a distinct winner and loser in that fight. So it's one of those movies that just gives me everything I want about those kind of movies. It's certainly a slight picture. I would argue objectively it's Jackie Chan's best American movie. Regardless of, I'm sure.
And one that wasn't repurposed and brought to America.
Yes. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to fight somebody over, Drunken Master 2 or Operation Super Cop. Again, it's one of those movies that I just love more than anyone else in the world.
Yeah, it's a terrific movie. I think it I think the British setting does more favors than the Old West, which is it's an interesting experiment, but there's an elegance to it, and it just really matches with Chan's sensibilities, and he just having a ball with this. And I feel like he could have come up with like 20 more set pieces if he would have been making a huge 10-hour movie, but it felt like it was endless, like the creativity there. And I think Aidan Gillen's a good villain, and Donnie Yen has a nice little spot here as well. And his death was cool. We've talked about it like a bunch of times, but letting Chow Lin shoot him with the firework after Jackie Chan loses is a nice touch to it.
Yeah, it sort of compensates for her being, damseled briefly in the third act. And I like the fact that in comparison to Rush Hour 2, which I enjoy, where, Chris Tucker got more action because he was a bigger star in between the two movies. In this film, Owen Wilson has noticeably less action in the first film.
Right. I wonder if he enjoyed his time on this because...
Well, no. I mean, he seemed to be, I remember he making a comment that, we make a great team because Jackie Chan does all of his own stunts and I do no stunts. Paraphrasing, but yeah, that was a surprise to me. Again, comparing it to Rush Hour 2, which had come out 2 years earlier, where all of a sudden Chris Tucker can hold his own in a fight scene. He, gets his own, sub-villain to kill. Seeing that he just fresh off a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and somehow he beats her.
The Cloverfield paradoxes, Shang-Chi, yeah. Poor gal.
Yeah.
What else? So this is just where we cap off this conversation with just a little bit of what else we're taking in besides Shanghai Knights at this time, some recommendations or things that might go on. Scott, what do you have going on? Reading any books, checking out any new TV shows, movies, or any articles you want to spotlight that you've written?
I am almost done with Teenage Bounty Hunters, which I'm enjoying. It's a Netflix show. Premiered last week. Oh, this is going to air last month. August.
Yeah.
By the time this airs, I will have seen Bill and Ted Face the Music. I got the screener, but I watched Bill and Ted for the first time in 30 years this morning. And then I'm going to watch Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey tomorrow. Which honestly,
Bogus Journey is really good.
That's funny because a lot of people say that, and I'm not going to. But I saw it once in theaters when I was 11 and didn't like it. So I'm really curious how I'm going to feel this time. The first one, it was one of those movies that I saw it once, I thought it's fine, and aside from being in this business, I would never have given it another thought again.
Gotcha.
I think the third act is very strong, and it really plays up the fish out of water aspect. And obviously, the two of them have wonderful chemistry together. And it's fine. It's a solid 3-star picture. Hopefully, by the time this drops, I will have driven to a drive-through so I see the New Mutants. Not drive-through, a drive-in. The New Mutants.
That's my plan for New Mutants.
Yeah.
New Mutants and Tenet is drive-in when like a week after the weekend it opens, so it's less crowded, and I'll just take it in that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm gonna do about Tenet. I could see. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Hopefully I'll have seen it by the time this airs.
Right.
I live in California where, they are not doing press screenings because it's not playing in California. And
you're not Tom Cruise flying to another country to see the movie.
It's good that his passport let him in.
Yeah. Right.
Although he's probably out of the country anyway.
We can't check his passport if he just parachutes in.
Or maybe he was wearing a mask over a mask.
Oh, that's true.
And with California, they're not even showing Tenet at the drive-ins because the policy is that unless indoor theaters are open, you can't show it at a drive-in. I'm assuming that's just to appease the theater chains. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. It's a complicated situation. There's no right answers here.
Right. Myself, I'm taking in right now. I just recently finished a book called Taking Shape by Travis Mullins and Dustin McNeil, which takes a long, hard look through the development of every movie in the Halloween series up to and including the 2018 one. Got a lot of interesting, a lot of stuff I knew, a lot of stuff fleshed out that I knew, and some tidbits I had no idea. So it's really, if you're into reading books about films or deep dives, that's really good. They have a sequel book scheduled to come out that's going to go over sequels that never happened with the films that they do touch upon in there. So that's a really good book. I moved on from that to a book just starting now called We Believe the Children by Richard Beck, which goes over the McMartin trials and the Satanic Panic era of the 1980s. Well, it doesn't speak an opinion, it's just facts, which is just showing how much of bullshit it is. And if you notice in our current times, we're kind of going through a rerun of that stuff right now. Film-wise, can't think of what I've just recently watched, but aside from Shanghai Knights for this podcast, I've just reviewed The Flash Complete 6th Season Blu-ray on WhySoBlue.com, which complete with air quotes, as that wasn't finished. And on Netflix, I've started The Umbrella Academy, which is on its 2nd season, but I didn't. People like to recommend shows, and there's all these hit shows, but I only have time for certain things because writing, watching, studying, all sorts of things. I get to it when I get to it, and I've been watching it slowly. Like I've only watched like one episode a night when I have watched it, and I think it might be a show that you need to watch more than one in a sitting because
this is The Flash.
No, Umbrella Academy on Netflix.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of it's not clicking with me as much as I hear it's great. It's basically X-Men with the personalities of the Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it a go through, but maybe I need to watch multiple episodes in the night for it to really cook. But that's how it is.
What did you think of the 6th season of The Flash?
I don't think anyone other than the second half of Batwoman really was
I think
that great this year.
I hope it's just because Crisis sort of spiked the punch on everybody.
Yeah, I like the concept of two different arcs in the season.
Yeah,
splitting that up, but show slowing down. I imagine it's only got a season, maybe 2 left. But at its worst, it's still a fun show for my family to watch because my kids like to watch it. They've grown up on this show, so this is like their one they watch. So yeah, this was maybe it's the weakest season. I'm not. I
wasn't happy with any of the CWDC stuff.
Yeah, Legends has been my favorite, and I was the most uninterested. Yeah. This season, I think Legends had a problem this season with just. I was Katie Lott's just too busy with Crisis because she barely appeared, and she's like the biggest strength of the show.
Yeah. They wrote out and then rewrote in Talia Ash in a way that, and she's terrific. It was fun watching her play 2 different versions of that character. Yeah. But it required set up an exposition that took away from just storytelling.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm look forward to. I love that we got this universe of superhero shows on the CW, and they have them for all different. Like I got family, like a Supergirl, Flash. I watch with my kids, and Legends, and Batwoman. It's going to be interesting next year. I have a review for that up too if you want to check that out. That was a couple weeks ago.
I thought was fine.
Yeah.
Mostly because I think to a certain extent it wasn't terribly impacted by Crisis.
Yeah, they did. They had the most interesting aspect of it with the dual sisters. So I thought that was really nifty. And I was really enjoying it towards the end a lot more, but now they're going to probably have another first season again, pretty much. But
why didn't they whoever they cast, why didn't they just recast the same character?
I don't know. What is the fear of that? Like, so with this show, 1 episode a month is going to be roundtables. Maybe I'll talk about like the fear of recasting nowadays for a topic. Folks, if you want to hear that, let me know. I'll make it happen faster. But I was like, oh, they have a chance to do something big here because nobody had been recasted. I mean, I think the last major one that people gave a pass on was Don Cheadle as Rhodey.
Yeah. Give or take the Dark Knight with Rachel Dawes, but that was before Iron Man 2. So you're right.
It was before. Yeah, I mean, now it's big. You gotta write them out. You gotta. No, you don't. No, you don't. They didn't write out James Bond. He was James Bond. Like maybe it's because I've grown up on just an era of not putting that kind of effort into sequels or not caring. Like I think we care about unimportant continuity way too much nowadays. Yes. So that's a topic for a later show down the road, Scott.
That's a whole cultural situation.
A teaser of how great this program's going to be. But
we're dropping Easter eggs and setting up world building for future installments.
There we go.
I become what I despise.
This is the dark universe right here, folks. No,
this is just a feature-length prologue.
Oh well, that'll. On that note, we'll wrap up this episode. So, Scott, thank you for helping kick this off. What avenues are best to keep up with you and what you're doing right now?
Well, obviously, I write exclusively, by choice, for Forbes. So, Google some variation of Forbes, Scott Mendelson, the ticket booth. My Twitter feed is at Scott Mendelson. And that's basically, I have a Facebook page that's mostly for kid pictures. You'll find most of my random rumblings and or whatever on Twitter.
The stuff for grown-ups.
Yes, the stuff for grown-ups. No comment.
Excellent. So you can find additional information on this program at BrandonPetersShow.com. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brandon4KUHD. This episode is over. I'll return tomorrow with 4K Blues Day. And keep safe, everyone, and keep the positivity in your film chatter.
Thank you for listening. The Brandon Peters Show is a Creative Zombie Studios production. Produced by Brad Shoemaker and Brandon Peters. Written and edited by Brandon Peters. Announcer vocals by Jessica Alsman. Theme song by Metavari. Web design and show art by Brad Shoemaker with Brandon Peters. All music and clips featured in the episode are property of their respective studios, and no infringement is intended. Additional information on this and other episodes at thebrandonpetershow.com. For any inquiries, press opportunities, or sponsorship, contact mail at thebrandonpetershow.com. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are found.
I think I speak for all of us at Scotland Yard when I say that no matter how far you are from the throne, you'll always be number one in our hearts.